On today's show, we're going to take you to Nova Scotia, Cape Breton actually, to meet the ghosts of the Fortress of Louisbourg, and to Baltimore, Maryland, to meet the ghosts of the USS Constellation, and from there to Moundsville, West Virginia, where phantoms lurk in the ruins of one of the most brutal prisons in United States history.
One evening, an employee at the Fortress of Louisbourg in Cape Breton was closing up for the night, making sure the public had all left for the day. As he was closing a window upstairs, he noticed a light was on in one of the dormers of the neighboring building. The guide thought this was odd. He was sure he had seen the staff from the other building lock up and leave. Then he saw in the dormer window a man, and it wasn't someone he recognized from the staff. There were a number of historic reenactors in full period costume visiting the site that day, so the guide thought one of them may have forgotten something and come back to claim it. After he had locked his building, the guide tried the door to the building where he had seen the man in the window. It was locked solid. As he looked up again, the man disappeared and the light faded. Afterwards, the guide confirmed with an associate that no one was in that building when it was locked, and no one had re-entered since.
Some say that the Fortress of Louisbourg in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia is Canada's largest living museum. So many people who work there and who visit there have not only seen ghosts, but they've talked with spirits too. It's believed that this fortress is alive with the dead.
Thousands of French and English soldiers and civilians died at Louisbourg during bloody battles. Even more perished from smallpox, wretched living conditions, and brutal winters. Tragically, most were never given proper burials. The historic museum was rebuilt over the remains of those who died here. Perhaps it is their restless spirits that haunt the fortress today. There are lots of historic buildings, perfect places for spirits from the past to haunt.
Louisbourg seems like an almost perfect place for supernatural experiences. So many people invested their dreams here and lived and died here. And now we've recreated this place, and it seems in doing that, we might have brought those people back here, either because they died unhappy and they walk these streets with their hopes and dreams kind of unfulfilled, or maybe because we've just perfectly created this place where they lived out those hopes and dreams, and they still inhabit these houses and these streets.
In the basement area of La Grange, the house, I believe, was the chief military surgeon's. In the basement area, that's where I did all my audio recording and video, infrared video filming as well. And we had audio recordings running. I had a digital recorder, I had a microcassette recorder, and also we had infrared film running on a tripod. So we were engaged in conversation, and toward the end of the video clip, you can clearly see on the back wall a dark, shadowy entity, male in appearance, as if a soldier wearing some uniform and a tricorn hat. And in his right hand, he appeared to be holding something. And whether it was a shovel, a scythe, or rake, but in his right hand, he was holding something. So he just comes in and then he disappears again.
The La Grange property is the home of Louisbourg's surgeon, and so he would have treated many people who were injured or ill here in Louisbourg. The property is also the site of one of the early cemeteries here in town. As the town expanded, those cemeteries would have been moved to the outskirts of town, and that wasn't unusual in developing communities at the time. There were two serious outbreaks of smallpox here in Louisbourg. The first was in the 1730s, and the second was during the second occupation in the 1750s. So during those periods, mortality rates here in Louisbourg would have been significantly higher than they were at other times. Most people weren't buried in coffins. Their bodies were wrapped in shrouds, and they were usually buried in shallow, unmarked graves. And there are several reasons for that. One of those is probably, as I mentioned before, that death was very much a part of everyday life. And when people died of contagious diseases, there was probably a need to bury those bodies fairly quickly. During sieges, there probably would have been more deaths than usual, and some of those bodies would have been people who had not been baptized as Roman Catholics, and so their bodies would not have been buried in the parish cemeteries. Sometimes human bones were found in places we weren't really expecting to find them, and it's not always easy to say exactly why those bodies were found in particular places.
We were having a mini encampment at the fortress here, and quite a few of us were staying in Chevalier House. Now, Chevalier was used as a storehouse for most of the time. There was nobody doing much in there and that. So one of our members had set up a nice army cot and went to sleep there. He had woke up early in the morning, and there was two figures standing by the bed. And they were in red uniform and that. And none of our people had a red uniform as it was. So when he got up, they were still there. And when he went to go, he had gone right towards them and ended up going right through them. So he went to the washroom and came back. There was nobody in sight. When he came back, he got back in his cot. And he felt the cot sort of moving a bit and that after being there a few minutes. And the first thing, he ended up on the floor with the cot turned over and everything.
The postern tunnel is kind of an eerie place, and when you walk through it, you get the feeling that you're walking through some sort of secret passageway. It was used in the 18th century to move troops during battle, so you could quickly get soldiers from outside the walls back into town, or you could move them from inside the town out onto the battlefield.
During our visit there, we set up in this round the center area of the postern tunnel. And we had an infrared camera running, but we had audio running as well, audio recorders. And there must have been a lot of battles through that passageway, a lot of battles over the years. And at one point, the voice of a British male soldier actually said his name, identified himself as Johnny Moulette, because what he said was, Johnny Moulette's clear. He's made it through the tunnel, as if either being chased or he's coming in and others are to come to follow, with a siege perhaps or a battle plan. So it's very strikingly interesting to go back almost 300 years and have these soldiers identify themselves by name.
After the break, the silent sentry who haunts the guardhouse.
One day I'm on duty next to the guardhouse. I have another staff member there with me, and it's kind of a quiet day, not too many visitors around. And we're just standing off from the guardhouse, and all of a sudden this pretty irate lady comes up to us, a visitor, and she says, "I'd like to go someplace to lodge a complaint. Who can I speak to?" I said, well, I'm one of the supervisors here. I can handle your situation. What seems to be the problem? And she said, I was just in the building over there and speaking to one of your staff members, and he completely ignored me. He was very rude.
Sir, what is your name?
I was like, well, that's not like our staff. Maybe something's going on. She's like, no, I was just speaking to him. I tried speaking in English and French, and he wouldn't answer me. He'd look at me, and then he'd look off in the distance like I wasn't there. It was pretty infuriating. So I said, well, I'll see what I can do. Just, relax. This doesn't usually happen here, and I'll go and see what I can do. So I took the other staff member, went to the guardhouse. We knew there was nobody around because there was only so many staff assigned to that area, and we were the only two around the guardhouse, supposedly, but I had to go check it out. No one was there, and there's only one way out. There's only one door and windows, and I can't see staff members, jumping through a window to try to avoid talking to me. So, I don't know. And I mean, it's not the last time that's happened either. There's other staff members come up and say that visitors have complained about the rude soldier in the guardhouse that just won't speak to them. So, I mean, what are you supposed to do? You can appease them and say, we'll deal with the situation, but it's kind of hard to deal with a situation you can't find.
A guide moved into Wilson House one summer, and unexplained things started to happen. Several times a week, almost always at the stroke of 7, the front door opened and closed. At other times, he would find the furnace pumping heat. The temperature in the house would suddenly climb to an uncomfortable level, sometimes reaching 100 degrees Fahrenheit, causing the guide to eventually abandon his lodgings. The fortress was destroyed during the siege of 1745. Many died that winter, still others during the reconstruction, but their spirits still go about their daily activities.
Towards the middle of the season, every year we try to have a staff after-hours dinner so that the new staff can get a little more used to the older staff and mix and mingle. It's great for morale. I mean, they work really closely every year, so we try to do this just to make it a little easier for them. And after the dinner, a lot of the new staff want to wander around site without the restrictions of their costumes and visitors around, just go places where they're not permitted to go because of the class of costume they wear. So me and another staff member were walking around. She wanted to see the Douaget home. So we entered the yard. We were going to take a walk into the back just by the garden there, and the other staff member stopped behind me. I didn't know what was going on, so I stopped and asked what was up. She said she could hear something, like singing or something, so I stopped and listened. I couldn't hear anything. But I thought maybe, older staff member playing a joke, trying to freak out the new people. So I said, just gone in back the yard and we'll see what's going on. And as we went in back, I thought I could start to hear something myself. So we just walked around the corner of the building, but there was nobody there. So we turned to leave, and then right there in front of us is this lady, I guess you could call her, standing there with a baby. I didn't get frightened. It was definitely a strange experience. I know maybe I should have been scared. I don't know.
Paranormal investigator Alan Hatfield also witnessed the ghost nursemaid.
But strikingly, for the first time, I was entertained by a female spirit who was singing, actually. To me, it sounded like an overture, an opening to an opera. But she had a very beautiful voice. And there was some music playing as well. Apparently, it sounded to me like an oboe or instrument or flute of some sort, but that wasn't in company. So we had actually been entertained by a spirit singing in a very beautiful voice. And the language is still unidentified, I believe. So whether it's Basque, or whether it's Spanish, Italian, French, I don't know. Lines are open. Parlez en français. Talk to us.
A ghostly cast of hundreds coexists side by side with the live reenactors at the living museum that is Fortress Louisburg. For those curious to know what life was like in a maximum security prison, they need only visit West Virginia's now closed Moundsville Penitentiary. If you've ever wondered what death was like in a maximum security prison, then come at night.
No, I'm not one of those guys that gets frightened easily. And I don't even believe in ghosts. Or I didn't, until I went to Moundsville. My wife's into this paranormal stuff, and she dragged me to one of those guided tours at the Moundsville Penitentiary. This guy was leading the tour. Led us down to this area in the prison. He was talking about all the prisoners who had committed suicide and committed other acts of murder within the prison.
For the crimes they committed behind these walls. They beat, stabbed, and murdered behind these walls. In addition to all the violence that occurred here, many of these men got severely depressed, and they committed suicide by hanging themselves in their cells.
I was just joking around with my wife. And then all of a sudden, I felt this scratching on my face. Like something was tearing into my skin. Reached my hand up, and when I brought it down, there was blood. It's one thing to be a skeptic when someone else is telling you what's going on. It's a whole nother thing when you have to experience it firsthand.
Gordon Jones learned what it means to scoff at the idea that ghosts inhabit Moundsville.
Moundsville Penitentiary in West Virginia was one of the most violent prisons in United States history. Murder, suicide, other violent crime, that was daily fare at Moundsville. Small wonder, then, that this is considered to be one of the most haunted facilities in all of North America.
Here, behind the walls of West Virginia's Moundsville prison, were housed some of the most brutal individuals imaginable. People for whom murder, rape, and assault were a way of life. But even for these human predators, life behind these walls could be maddening, and some would choose the shortest route out of this penitentiary.
I worked a total of 18 years in this institution, 16 years of it which was in healthcare, 2 years in administration as a deputy warden. My third day on the job in this institution, I was ordered to North Hall just as I entered work to cut a man down who had hung himself that morning. And they've always had a statement here at the prison that if you died in here, your soul stayed here. So I think that has a lot to do with a lot of our paranormal activity that we have inside the institution.
Tom Moore and his group of researchers from Mid-Ohio Valley Ghost Hunters have been to Moundsville before. Today, they will focus on areas with a known history of violence, beginning with the Alamo, where the most dangerous criminals were confined.
The Alamo is basically the part where if you came to this prison, you pretty much never got out. Murderers, severe criminals lived in this area. I'm currently using my night shot camcorder seeing if I can capture any phenomena on film.
This prison, of course, has a lot of different types of hauntings and spirits and ghosts. Has a lot of imprint hauntings. That's another real feature where you hear sounds, doors opening and closing. And then you also have other types of non-human types of spirits, which is rather interesting, as well as earthbound spirits, unhappy spirits that really have no way of knowing how to move on.
Our group was walking down the Alamo where some of the more disturbed and dangerous inmates were. And as we passed one of the cells, I sensed something, so I went back. And the cell I sensed something in, I felt and I saw this ectoplasm, so I went and I took a picture. And as I lowered my camera to see what I'd taken a picture of, I felt this horrible stabbing pain in my back, and it doubled me over, and I screamed, and one of the girls came over to see if I was okay, and I was fine, and we walked away. But later I found out from one of the former guards, who is now a tour guide here at the prison, that one of the inmates was actually stabbed in his lower back, almost at that precise place outside of his cell. It was one of the most disturbing experiences I've ever had.
There's the legend of one ghost inmate, known as Boss Ghost. In real life, his name was Red Snyder. When Snyder was apprehended in the basement of his home, he was cleaning up after what was to be his most notorious crime. A day earlier, Red Snyder had butchered his father, his mother, and even their dog. Their bodies were chopped up and neatly packed into a set of suitcases.
Red Snyder was an inmate that the entire time I was here for 18 years, he remained locked up in what we call the North Hall or the Alamo. I think I only saw him unlocked one time. His behavior was such that, from the administrative standpoint, it wasn't safe for him to be in population. While he was in here, he killed twice. He had the notorious name, and somebody wanted to take that name with him. And so right before the closure of our prison, two boys got up one morning to go to recreation. He was supposed to go with them, and both of those boys stabbed him to death, stabbed him 38 times. So the Red Snyder aura stays with us to this day because his soul is inside this prison.
When we come back, paranormal investigators explore Red Snyder's cell. The paranormal researchers begin their work in the cell of notorious murderer Red Snyder.
There's nothing down here now.
It's a current 64, 65 degrees in here. It's consistent.
Oh. Okay.
Uh-oh.
All right.
Uh-oh, there they go. He's back. Well, earlier in the evening, we were in this particular section, and Red was being discussed. He sort of visited us for a while. Well, he's not totally understanding what's going on, and it pulls him back here, for you to even mention his name or talk about him. With any kind of a spirit, the more you talk about them, the more you focus on them, the stronger they get, And same is true with him, but he's fading in and out, which is interesting why he's doing that. Right now, what I'm feeling is I feel that my throat, someone has my voice box and is actually pressing on my voice box right now. That's not unusual in places like this. And probably after I go home after a while, I'll be okay. But right now, there's a lot of pressure right on my voice box as I'm talking about this.
We were walking down the Alamo once again. I was walking with one of the tour guides who was formerly a prison guard, and we saw the Shadow Man. and he's this shadowy, dark figure. And we saw him at the exact same time, and as we tried to approach him, he kept stepping back. Every couple steps we tried to take forward, he'd recede back. And the thing about the Shadow Man is that his face is dark, you can't see it, it's a shadow. And it's one of the most common sightings here. A lot of people have seen the Shadow Man.
We find it throughout the prison. The most famous one now is the Shadow Man. I've actually seen him in 2 different photographs by 2 different people that have photographed him inside the institution. Can't explain who he is or where he came from, but it's certainly a shadow of a man inside this institution.
We're about to do an investigation of the hole, which is sometimes referred to as solitary confinement. In this location, there was an inmate who was cut to ribbons by a group of inmates who thought he was a snitch for the warden. People say he's still here. He still works here. He's still down here in the dark. This is part of the maintenance area. They have the boiler rooms. So they ambushed him down here and cut him to ribbons before anyone found him. And this is where they found his body. The sightings of him walking above this area were documented by the guards while the prison was still open. They would call from one guard tower to the next to see if one of the inmates was out when he wasn't supposed to be, and that was after the murder.
Well, as I walked in here, pretty much what I felt from the inmate that was actually murdered down here was he was first ambushed. He was stabbed in the kidneys. That's where the initial blows started as his back was turned. And that's pretty much, they were pretty strong stabs there in the kidneys. But this is not the kind of spirit I really want to open myself up to, you know, and begin to communicate with. I don't want to, so I'm not. I just don't really want to open up to him.
The Sugar Shack is a place located in our basement. It was named because it was an area where the inmates would go and play cards, recreation, and so forth. But it became a very violent place. There was a lot of strong-arming that went on inside there. Strong-arming is where a tougher inmate would take something from a weaker inmate. So when it came to the gambling issues, when it came to playing cards, when it came down to the exchange of money, that was very violent in that area. It's very hard to secure. It's very difficult for officers to do their job in that area. It only lasted about 1.5 years, and then after that, we closed the Sugar Shack.
We're getting ready to do investigation on the Sugar Shack, which is one of the most active places in the prison. There were a lot of violence, a lot of rapes, shankings, a lot of horrible things have left their imprints on this area. And we're going to investigate and see what's still down here. I'm already getting activity on the Gauss meter. The electricity's off, so it can't be an external source. Okay, with the Gauss meter, it's picking up variations in the electromagnetic field by just... See, we're getting some interference now. They're happy to see us. But it can signify something passing, an area, a hotspot of paranormal activity.
What you have down here is you have a lot of negativity, inhuman acts. It attracts a lower type of entity that in past ages might be called demons. There's little creatures that kind of squirm around on the floor. They sort of remind me of things in paintings by Bosch. And it seems like what happened was some of the prisoners that were here, in an effort to intimidate some of, stronger prisoners, would say that they were devil worshippers or join the Church of Satan or something like that. But the last ghost hunt we did in Moundsville, one of these little entities followed me home. And for about a month, we had the sound of like a baby crying. But as you listen closer to this baby crying, you could tell that the voice, the sound, was not exactly human. Anybody that I would consider extra sensitive, impressionable in any way should not come to Moundsville Penitentiary, because it can actually affect your health and affect your mood.
We've investigated 3 major parts of the prison, 3 very active parts. We've gotten a lot of readings with our meters. We've gotten a lot of interesting photos. We're going to check for EVPs. We've gotten a lot of activity. A very successful hunt. This is a very haunted location.
Are there really ghosts at Moundsville? Did Lisa Cox come into contact with one? And what about Gordon Jones? Can they all be mistaken? And if there are ghosts at Moundsville, who are they? Who is Boss Ghost? Who is Shadow Man? Is Boss Ghost the spirit of Red Snyder? Whatever is haunting the cells and corridors of Moundsville Prison is malevolent and does not want to be disturbed. Visitors are not welcome and may be harmed if they stay. Coming up next, the ghosts of the tall ship USS Constellation. The USS Constellation, with its rich history dating back to the Civil War, is a major tourist attraction in Baltimore, Maryland. That history also makes it a candidate for ghost activity. There have been many sightings over the years of ghostly crew members who can't or won't leave the ship.
I'm a history buff, and I can't resist taking a tour of a tall ship. There wasn't one scheduled for a while, so I decided I'd wander around on my own, and I got down below decks pretty deep. I saw this boy, and he had a gash on his face. I thought maybe he was lost or needed help. I tried to get to him. I hollered at him.
Hey, little boy, are you all right?
But he slipped through the shadows of the hammocks.
Hey, little boy.
I tried to get close to him, and then I noticed he was wearing an old-fashioned costume or uniform of some kind. And tried to get his attention. He disappeared. I mean, he was there, and then he was gone. I didn't know what to think. I mean, there was no trace of him. I looked everywhere, and I thought maybe I was losing my mind. But I know what I saw, and I saw that boy.
Life in the Navy in the era of the tall ships was a brutal affair. The USS Constellation has had its share of sadistic captains, callous crew, and horrible murders. It's said that many of these souls still walk the decks, some tied by their awful murders, others by their devotion to duty.
Vince Wilson and his team of researchers from the Baltimore Society for Paranormal Research have come to investigate the reported ghost sightings on board. They've brought with them some sophisticated equipment that will allow them to record sounds, images, and temperature remotely to eliminate the possibility of human interference in the recording. They plan to focus their hunt on the areas of the ship where most of the sightings have happened.
Tonight we are going to investigate these stories, rumors.
Over the years, there have been many reports of past sailors still being on deck. Even crew from the previous Constellation are reported to haunt this one. The team will be using video and audio technology to record the presence of paranormal activity. They set up a command headquarters on the middeck of the Constellation.
It happened here on the Constellation. I was down below and this man approached me. He was wearing a 19th century seaman's uniform. Said he'd be delighted to show me around. I said, sure. I thought he was a tour guide because of his extensive knowledge of the technical details of the ship. Just the kind of stuff I like. We had a great time together. When it was over, I thanked him and went topside. On the way out, I stopped by the tour guide to thank him for the excellent tour. And he said, "Tour? What tour? We don't have any tours going on right now." So we went down below. There was no one there.
Vince Wilson and his crew will take a different approach on this investigation. They will be using a RoboCam, their all-terrain video camera, actually a remote-controlled car mounted with a wireless infrared remote-controlled camera. The RoboCam also has a compass and thermometer attached to the back. The purpose is to remotely record an area without the interruption of human presence. Vince Wilson devised the contraption to use in areas that might be too dangerous to put human investigators into, such as older buildings with loose floorboards or dry rot. But the remote camera also refutes criticism that images were manipulated by the humans using it.
Constellation is a 22-gun sloop of war built in 1854. The ship was built to replace the original Constellation, a 38-gun frigate actually built here in Baltimore in 1797. In 1955, the ship was brought here to Baltimore, where it has been a museum ship ever since. Between 1996 and 1999, the ship underwent a massive structural restoration, which essentially saved it sinking into the harbor. Since that time, the USS Constellation Museum has been working hard to restore the ship to the pristine condition that it is in today.
The ship had not only older crew members or adults, but young crew members, and they were their nicknames. They were nicknamed Powder Monkeys. They were age 11 to 17. Their official ranking was ship's boys, and their main duty when the ship was in action was to carry powder to the gun crews, carry the powder cartridges to the gun crews. When they weren't doing that, they had all sorts of other tasks, keeping the ship clean and ship shape. They probably would act as stewards for the officers. Many tasks, and the ship was also their school.
One of these young powder monkeys suffered a horrible fate aboard the Constellation. Two drunken sailors pursued him through the lower deck area. When he was not willing to part with his meager funds, they slashed him repeatedly and left the poor young lad to bleed to death. Since then, many have reported seeing a young man with a slashed face below deck on the Constellation. The Constellation's first ghost sighting dates back to 1861.
Perhaps the best documented story pertaining to this ship occurred during the Civil War and appears in the diary and journals of some of the ship's crew. The story talks about a fellow who was locked in the ship's brig and who saw two of his fellow shipmates who had died recently appear before him. Attention was brought to this when the fellow in the brig began to sing.
It's all for me beer and tobacco, for a spent all me tin on lasses drinking gin.
When the Marine Guard arrived and asked him why he was making such a sound, and he told the guard that the two sailors who had appeared had commanded him to sing so that they could dance. Now, of course, there was nothing there for the Marine to see, but he did find 5 buckets that were stacked very awkwardly, and despite the pitch of the ship and its movement, refused to fall.
You have to remember that people back in the mid-19th century were very superstitious, and I should say sailors were extremely superstitious because there was so much at sea that was unknown. And so they probably thought that this was as a result of the ghost of the cook's apprentice. So, you know, they probably thought it was true, and who knows, it might be.
No one's ever tried to scientifically explain ghosts before, and that's pretty much exactly what we're trying to do here. This is an electromagnetic field detector. Specifically, it's a single-axis electromagnetic field detector, and it's used for detecting electromagnetic fields. This multimeter here converts the voltage into a field of measurement called milligauss, which is the measurement used for measuring magnetic fields. We use these devices like this, which is a thermocoupler thermometer. It uses differences in the electrical resistance of the air to give you an accurate air temperature reading. And what's great about this is it detects the air temperature 3 times every second, so it's very fast. It's very, very accurate.
So this is actually a helium-filled balloon, and underneath here we actually have a little pinhole camera, and it's remote control operated so that we can actually fly it into different locations and get images that we need to get that we can't actually walk into ourselves.
Vince Wilson and his team let the hot air balloon camera loose, choosing to concentrate on this technological device as the primary instrument of their ghost hunt. For 3 hours, this remote control camera moved silently below the decks of the Constellation, but no anomalies were picked up. The team chose to focus on the area where the ghost of a former captain of the Constellation has been repeatedly seen.
According to legend, Captain Truxton, who was the captain of the previous USS Constellation, the Revolutionary War era Constellation, he found one of the sailors sleeping on duty. And it was not uncommon for lethal punishments to be made onto the sailors at the time. People believe that they have seen Captain Truxton's ghost on the current manifestation of the USS Constellation. And I don't know if it's been pointed out yet, but this is not the original Constellation. This ship is not 200 years old. However, beams from the original Constellation do exist in the hull of this ship.
The museum has always tried to keep an open mind when it comes to dealing with these types of phenomenon. Because there is documentation in the historic record that talks about unexplained events taking place on board the ship, it would seem somewhat quick of us to simply dismiss them out of hand. However, with the stories that pertain to the original frigate Constellation, such as the ones regarding Commodore Truxton, they do become somewhat fantastic when one keeps in mind that the 3 most pervasive stories associated with Constellation actually don't even pertain to this ship. They pertain to this ship's predecessor, the frigate Constellation, which was cut up for scrap in 1853.
The museum kind of takes a neutral view, and we let people make their own decisions, come to their own conclusions. There may or may not be some sort of paranormal activity on board. I have not ever witnessed it myself. I've been told that some people have. I know, from my own personal experience, wandering around the ship in the dark at night on occasion, that it can be a little unnerving down there. There you can certainly imagine someone from the ship's distant past appearing and telling you which way to turn and what to look for.
Well, there is a lot of history regarding ghosts here that would tend to suggest that. The Constellation definitely has the possibility of actually being haunted.
Despite the skepticism voiced by museum personnel, Vince Wilson and his team make plans to come again. They will continue to collect the evidence needed to build a case for paranormal activity below the decks of the USS Constellation.